My brother has his sword, and I have my mind. And a mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone.
Once, he was the sharpest mind in the Seven Kingdoms, a man half the size of others, but twice as dangerous in wit, a player in the game who could talk his way out of any trap, and when necessary, spring one of his own. Tyrion Lannister, mocked as the imp, underestimated as the dwarf, yet feared as the cleverest man alive. He had survived King's Landing at its deadliest, orchestrated victories where armies faltered, and built alliances that held empires together. But somewhere along the way, the glimmer faded.
If I were arranging a royal assassination, I'd plan it in such a way that I wouldn't be standing there gawking like a fool when the king died.
The man whose words, once cut like Valyrian steel, now seemed dulled, his advice leading to ruin instead of triumph. Casterly Rock fell into a trap of his own design. Daenerys' armies were scattered, and a desperate gamble beyond the wall cost a dragon its life. Those who once admired him, from Sansa Stark to Daenerys Targaryen, began to question if the fabled Lannister wit had deserted him. Was Tyrion truly slipping into folly, or was there something more beneath the surface? A hidden gambit, a dangerous deception, a lie told not for power, but for survival itself. To answer that, we must trace his fall, his choices, and the shadows that followed him. There was a time when Tyrion Lannister was untouchable. In the poisonous court of King's Landing, he wielded words like daggers. His tongue could disarm foes faster than steel, and his mind worked in layers others could scarcely perceive. As Hand of the King, he defended the city against Stannis Baratheon's naval assault, turning wildfire and cunning into a victory that would be remembered for generations. Even in exile across the sea, he found his footing, guiding Daenerys Targaryen's rule in Meereen from chaos into stability. Everywhere he went, Tyrion proved himself the rarest of things in Westeros, a survivor whose brilliance was his greatest weapon. But brilliance is fragile. With Daenerys at his side, Tyrion was meant to be her greatest counselor, her strategist, the hand she could trust above all others. Instead, the cracks began to show. His counsel no longer cut through problems with elegance. It stumbled, faltered, and led armies into ruin. Allies began to whisper. Enemies began to smirk. The cleverest man in the Seven Kingdoms looked suddenly very ordinary. The decline was not gradual, it was stark. First, his strategy to capture Casterly Rock left the Unsullied stranded while Euron's fleet destroyed their ships. Then, Highgarden fell to the Lannisters, stripping Daenerys of allies and wealth. His proposal to capture a White beyond the Wall ended in catastrophe. The death of Viserion, the shattering of trust, and a queen pushed to the edge of fury. Each failure piled upon the last. Daenerys began to question him openly. Sansa Stark, once impressed, mocked him. "I used to think you were the cleverest man alive." The sting was not just in her words, but in their truth. Tyrion's reputation, his very identity, seemed to be slipping away. To many watching from the outside, Tyrion's decline seemed almost too abrupt. The man who once dominated the battlefield with ideas, not swords, suddenly blundered like a novice. Why? Part of the answer lies not in the character, but in the telling of his story. In the early seasons, Tyrion's dialogue was lifted directly from George R.R. Martin's novels, prose honed with meticulous care, wit sharpened across thousands of pages. But when the show surpassed the books, that well of crafted brilliance ran dry. The showrunners, skilled in spectacle, struggled to replicate the intricacy of Martin's wordsmithing. Political games grew thinner, character motivations more hurried, and the great cerebral players, Tyrion, Littlefinger, even Varys, found their roles diminished as battles and dragons stole the stage. This shift may explain part of the change, but not all of it. For Tyrion's fall was not simply sloppy writing. It felt deliberate, pointed, and purposeful. Why make the cleverest man in Westeros a fool? Perhaps because he was never truly a fool at all. Each misstep, each blunder could be the mask of something deeper. The showrunners seemed to invite suspicion, dropping hints through the sharp tongues of other characters. Olenna Tyrell whispered warnings not to trust him. Daenerys bristled at his failures. Sansa threw his reputation back at him like a poisoned dart. Viewers were left in the same position as Dany herself, forced to wonder, had Tyrion lost his mind, or was he playing a longer, darker game than anyone realized? The shadows hinted at layers beneath the surface. To see them, we must turn north, to the moment when Tyrion's belief in the threat of the dead reshaped his every choice. It began quietly, almost unnoticed, on the wind-swept cliffs of Dragonstone. Jon Snow, grim and unyielding, spoke of an enemy greater than thrones or crowns, the dead marching south. Most dismissed him as a northern fanatic, but Tyrion listened. In the privacy of their walk, away from Daenerys' watchful gaze, he confessed what others would not. "I believe you." He trusted Jon's honesty, and by extension, Jorah Mormont's before him. And once Tyrion accepted the truth of the White Walkers, the game shifted. No longer was he merely hand to a queen fighting for a throne. He had glimpsed the storm that threatened all thrones. From that moment, every choice he made would bend, subtly or overtly, toward one goal: uniting humanity against death itself. But conviction was not enough. Daenerys was deaf to pleas of distant terrors. She had dragons and armies poised for conquest. Abandoning her war for an unseen foe was unthinkable. Tyrion knew he could not persuade her with words alone. So he compromised. He helped Jon mine dragonglass, a token effort, a gesture toward preparing for war. Yet he also carried Jon's burden, how to make others believe. Here lay the dilemma that would define him. He could not abandon his queen's ambitions, nor could he ignore the truth that Jon carried. Somewhere between those extremes, he sought an answer. And in that fragile middle ground, deception began to take root. The answer came to him in the form of a nightmare. Proof. If words could not sway Daenerys, nor Cersei, then perhaps the dead themselves could. Capture a white, drag it south, force doubters to look into the abyss with their own eyes. The plan was madness, desperate and reckless. Yet Tyrion sold it with conviction, framing it as a way to win Cersei's truce. But in truth, the scheme was aimed at Daenerys as much as her sister. For if she saw death made flesh, if she saw it tear and claw and shriek before her very throne, how could she deny the war in the north? It was not the cleverest plan he had ever devised, but it was the only one left to him. Thus, the hunt was set in motion, and with it, the first steps toward the lie that would haunt him forever. The White Hunt ended in ruin, blood spilled, lives lost, and a dragon torn from the skies. Yet from the ashes of that disaster came proof undeniable. Death could walk, scream, and lunge in chains. Daenerys had seen it. Cersei had seen it. And for a fleeting moment, the impossible had become undeniable truth. But proof alone was not enough. The lords and queens who gathered in the ancient dragon pit of King's Landing demanded more than terror. They demanded terms. Jon Snow, steadfast to his own doom, refused to bend the truth to win Cersei's favor. His rigid honor left Daenerys vulnerable. Her armies stalled on the cusp of war. And so Tyrion, caught between honesty and annihilation, made his choice. If the North would not lie, then he would. It was then that he walked alone into the lion's den, Cersei's chambers. What words were spoken behind that locked door remain one of the greatest mysteries of the war. We saw only fragments, the venomous barbs exchanged, the wary circling of predators, Tyrion's sudden realization of her supposed pregnancy. But what happened after? What bargain? What plea? What manipulation? The world never saw. When the doors opened, Cersei returned with a mask of reluctant compromise. She strode into the dragon pit, declaring a truce, offering her armies to march north and cloaking herself in the illusion of sacrifice. Yet no one had asked her for soldiers. She had volunteered them. Why? The answer lay in the trap she had set. Cersei never intended to keep her word. but by giving it, she placed the weight of her inevitable betrayal squarely on Tyrion's shoulders. When her soldiers failed to appear, Daenerys would not curse her sister. She would turn her fury upon her hand. And Tyrion, for his part, carried the lie forward. Whether he believed her or not, whether he hoped against hope, or knowingly deceived his queen, he emerged from that chamber determined to convince Daenerys of Cersei's false promise. In that moment, Tyrion Lannister ceased to be merely clever. He became something darker, a man who embraced the necessity of lies, not for crowns, but for survival. The dragon pit ended in applause for a fragile truce, but beneath the cheers, Tyrion knew he had just set the stage for his own undoing. Cersei Lannister never agreed to anything without a dagger hidden beneath her gown. At the dragon pit, she had seemed shaken by the white, snarling terror, seemed to hesitate before the abyss of the living dead. But beneath her mask, her mind was already moving, spinning lies like webs. By promising her armies to the cause, she gave her enemies exactly what they craved. Hope. Hope that the war for the throne could be paused. Hope that humanity might stand united. Yet Cersei had no intention of marching north. Her words cost her nothing. Her soldiers would stay in the capital, her fleet would grow, and her enemies would squander their strength fighting the dead. But her lie carried with it an even more poisonous gift. It placed Tyrion in a noose. For when the truth emerged, Daenerys would not only see her sister's betrayal, she would see her hand's failure. Either he had been a fool to believe Cersei, or worse, a conspirator in her deception. Both paths led to the same end. Her trust in Tyrion shattered, and Tyrion knew it. He was not blind to Cersei's games, nor deaf to the silence of the armies that would never march. Yet he carried the burden of her promise back to his queen, presenting it as truth. Why? Because the alternative was worse. Without that lie, Daenerys would never commit her armies north. Without that lie, the living would be divided when the dead came. So Tyrion chose his trap willingly. Like a man stepping into chains, he clasped the manacles on his own wrists. His secret bargain, his silence about what passed between him and Cersei, hung above him like the sword of Damocles. Any day, any hour, the blade could fall. Daenerys might discover the deceit, or Cersei might reveal her treachery, and either way, Tyrion would stand condemned. It was a gamble with no escape, a deception that could only end in disgrace. And yet, in his mind, it was the lesser evil. For if humanity survived, perhaps his fall would be worth the cost. Each misstep drove another wedge between queen and hand. Daenerys, who once relied on Tyrion's counsel, began to regard him with narrowing eyes. At Casterly Rock, he promised her victory. She found only ash and betrayal. At Highgarden, he failed to foresee Jaime's cunning, and she lost the wealth of the Reach. Beyond the wall, his plan cost her a dragon, a wound that cut deeper than words could heal. And still, he stood beside her, offering counsel that seemed only to lead her astray. Her patience thinned. In her war councils, she turned away from his advice, listening instead to her own instincts or to the raw honesty of Jon Snow. She began to view Tyrion not as a savior of her cause, but as its liability. Where once his wit had dazzled her, now his words rang hollow, an echo of cleverness past. And it was not only Daenerys. Others saw it too. Olenna Tyrell, moments before her death, had whispered a warning: "Ignore Tyrion. He is clever, but he does not understand." Varys, master of whispers, urged him to keep his queen in check before she slid into tyranny, a task Tyrion seemed ever less capable of fulfilling. Even Sansa Stark, once his reluctant bride, looked upon him with cool disdain. "I used to think you were the cleverest man alive." The judgment stung, not because it was cruel, but because it rang true. Tyrion, the man who once outwitted kings, queens, and monsters, now seemed powerless to guide even the queen he served. Yet, beneath the surface, he clung to his secret, the lie he had told at the dragon pit, the gamble that might one day save them all or doom him forever. Trust was breaking, suspicion was spreading, and the moment of reckoning crept closer with every breath Daenerys took. Each failure pushed Tyrion further from Daenerys' side. His strategies that once shone with brilliance now crumbled into disaster. Fleets burned, allies lost, even a dragon slain. Daenerys' patience waned. In council, she turned from his words, seeking guidance elsewhere. The woman he had sworn to guide no longer trusted him, and the sting of betrayal lingered in every glance she cast his way. Others saw it too. Olenna Tyrell urged Dany never to heed him. Varys warned he could not control her descent. And Sansa Stark cut deepest. "I used to think you were the cleverest man alive." Tyrion bore their scorn in silence, knowing they judged only what they saw, not the lie he had carried since the dragon pit. For in truth, he had sacrificed honesty for survival, binding himself to a deception he knew would one day consume him. Cersei's false promise was his burden, and when it shattered, Daenerys would turn her fury not only on her sister, but on him. Thus, the cleverest man alive lived beneath a sword only he could see, knowing that to save the living, he had doomed himself. His wit had not abandoned him, it had betrayed him.